Thomas Hobbes begins his philosophy with a very direct and almost unsettling question about human nature. What are human beings like when there is no government, no laws, and no authority to control behavior? Instead of imagining an ideal world, he tries to understand what would actually happen if people were left entirely on their own. To answer this, he describes a condition often called the state of nature. In this condition, there are no rules that everyone is required to follow. There is no central power to enforce agreements or settle disputes. Each person is free to act according to their own desires and judgments. At first, this might sound like complete freedom. People can do whatever they want without restriction. But Hobbes quickly points out that this kind of freedom creates a serious problem. Human beings are naturally driven by desires, fears, and the need to survive. When everyone has the freedom to pursue their own goals without limitation, conflicts are almost inevitable. People may want the same resources, such as food, land, or security. When two individuals desire the same thing and cannot both have it, they become rivals. This rivalry can lead to competition, and competition can lead to conflict. Without a higher authority to control these conflicts, there is nothing to prevent them from turning into violence. Another important factor is uncertainty. In a world without laws or protection, no one can feel completely safe. Even if a person is strong, they cannot be sure that others will not unite against them. Even if someone is peaceful, they cannot trust that others will behave the same way. This constant uncertainty creates fear. Because of this fear, individuals may act aggressively even when they do not want to. If a person believes that others might attack them, they may decide to strike first in order to protect themselves. This creates a cycle where fear leads to preemptive actions, and those actions create even more fear. Hobbes describes this condition as a situation where life becomes extremely difficult and unstable. Without security, people cannot focus on building, creating, or improving their lives. Instead, their energy is consumed by the need to protect themselves and survive. In such a condition, long-term planning becomes almost impossible. Activities like agriculture, trade, and the development of knowledge require stability and cooperation. Without trust and security, these activities cannot develop properly. Society, as we know it, cannot exist in this state. Because of these conditions, Hobbes famously describes life in this situation as harsh and deeply uncomfortable. The constant presence of fear and danger prevents people from living peaceful or fulfilling lives. Even basic comfort becomes difficult to achieve when safety is never guaranteed. However, he does not believe that human beings are naturally evil in a simple sense. Instead, he argues that their behavior in this condition is shaped by the environment they are in. When there are no rules or protections, people act in ways that increase their chances of survival. Fear, competition, and self-preservation become dominant forces. At the same time, human beings also possess reason. They are capable of thinking, planning, and understanding consequences. This ability allows them to recognize that living in constant conflict is not beneficial. Even though they are driven by self-interest, they can see that cooperation would lead to a better life. This realization becomes the starting point for a major shift. If individuals understand that constant conflict harms everyone, they may begin to look for ways to create stability. They may recognize that giving up some freedom could lead to greater security. This idea leads to the concept of a social contract. Instead of living in a condition where everyone acts independently, individuals agree to follow certain rules. They give up some of their natural freedom in exchange for protection and order. This agreement is not just between individuals. It also involves the creation of a central authority that has the power to enforce these rules. Without enforcement, agreements would not be reliable. People might promise to cooperate, but break their promises when it benefits them. The central authority, often described as a sovereign, holds the power to create and enforce laws. This authority ensures that agreements are followed and that conflicts are controlled. By doing this, it provides the security that individuals cannot achieve on their own. The presence of this authority changes the entire structure of society. Instead of constant fear and uncertainty, people can begin to trust that rules will be upheld. This trust allows for cooperation, trade, and the development of culture and knowledge. However, this system requires individuals to give up certain freedoms. In the state of nature, a person has the freedom to do anything they believe is necessary for survival. Under a social contract, they must follow laws and accept limits on their behavior. For Hobbes, this trade is necessary. Absolute freedom without security leads to chaos, while limited freedom within a stable system allows for a better life. The goal is not to eliminate freedom entirely, but to create a balance where people can live safely and productively. This foundation sets up the central idea of his philosophy. Human beings create political systems not because they're naturally cooperative, but because they recognize the dangers of living without structure. Order, authority, and law become essential tools for maintaining peace and preventing the return of constant conflict. Through this perspective, the beginning of his philosophy presents a realistic and sometimes uncomfortable view of human nature and society. It suggests that stability does not come naturally, but must be carefully constructed and maintained through agreements and authority. As this understanding develops, the focus shifts from the danger of a natural condition to the structure required to escape it completely. Recognizing the problem is only the beginning. The real challenge lies in building a system strong enough to prevent society from falling back into conflict. The agreement between individuals, often described as the social contract, is not simply a promise to behave better. It is a complete transformation of how power operates. Each person gives up the right to act entirely on their own judgment and transfers that right to a central authority. This transfer is not partial or temporary. It must be strong enough to create real order. Otherwise, the old fears and rivalries will return. The reason for this is simple. If individuals keep the ability to ignore rules whenever it benefits them, then trust cannot exist. Agreements would become meaningless because anyone could break them when it is convenient. Without trust, cooperation collapses, and society begins to resemble the unstable condition it was trying to escape. Because of this, the authority created by the social contract must be absolute in its power to enforce laws. This authority is often described as a sovereign. It can take different forms, such as a single ruler, an assembly, or another governing structure, but its defining feature is that its power cannot be divided or constantly challenged. If power is divided among multiple competing forces, disagreements within the authority itself can lead to instability. Different groups may struggle for control, creating confusion about which rules should be followed. This internal conflict weakens the system and opens the door for disorder to return. For this reason, a strong and unified authority becomes essential. The sovereign must have the ability to make final decisions, enforce laws, and maintain order without being constantly undermined. This concentration of power may appear dangerous, but Hobbes argues that it is far less dangerous than the chaos of society without effective authority. At this point, the role of law becomes much clearer. Laws are not simply guidelines or suggestions. They are the foundation of stability. They define what is allowed and what is forbidden, and they provide a predictable structure for behavior. When laws are consistently enforced, individuals can plan their actions with confidence, knowing that others are bound by the same rules. This predictability allows society to develop in ways that are impossible in a condition of constant uncertainty. People can invest time and effort into long-term goals. They can build homes, develop skills, engage in trade, and create systems of cooperation. All of this depends on the assurance that their efforts will not be destroyed by sudden violence or betrayal. Another important aspect of this system is the concept of justice. In the natural condition, there is no shared standard of right and wrong that everyone is required to follow. Each person acts according to their own judgment. But within a political system, justice is defined by the laws created by the sovereign. This means that something is considered just when it follows the established laws and unjust when it violates them. Justice is no longer based on individual opinion, but on a common framework that applies to everyone. This shared understanding reduces conflict because disputes can be resolved according to clear rules rather than personal interpretations. At the same time, the authority of the sovereign depends on its ability to maintain peace. If the sovereign fails to provide security, the entire purpose of the social contract begins to collapse. Individuals agreed to give up some of their freedom in exchange for protection. If that protection disappears, the agreement loses its meaning. Because of this, the primary responsibility of the sovereign is to ensure the safety of its people. Everything else, including laws and institutions, exists to support this goal. A stable and peaceful society allows individuals to live without constant fear, which is the fundamental benefit of political organization. However, this system also raises important questions about freedom. If the sovereign has such strong authority, what happens to individual liberty? Hobbes approaches this issue in a practical way. He argues that freedom is not the ability to do anything at any time, but the ability to act within a stable system where one is protected from harm. In other words, freedom within society is different from freedom in a natural condition. In a natural condition, a person may have unlimited freedom, but they also face constant danger. In a structured society, some freedoms are limited, but in return, individuals gain security and the ability to live more stable lives. This trade becomes central to understanding his philosophy. Absolute freedom without security leads to fear and conflict, while limited freedom within a strong system allows for cooperation and development. The goal is not to maximize freedom in every sense, but to create conditions where life becomes more secure and predictable. Another important idea is that individuals remain equal in a certain sense, even within a structured society. In a natural condition, people are roughly equal in their ability to harm one another. Even the strongest person can be defeated through cooperation or strategy. This equality creates the initial condition of fear and competition. Within society, this equality is managed through laws. Instead of individuals using their own strength to settle disputes, they rely on a system that applies rules equally. This reduces the need for personal conflict and allows disagreements to be resolved through established procedures. At the same time, human nature does not change completely. People still have desires, ambitions, and fears. The difference is that these tendencies are now regulated by laws and authority. Instead of leading directly to conflict, they are channeled into structured forms of interaction. This is why the stability of the system depends not only on the existence of authority, but also on its effectiveness. Weak enforcement of laws can lead to a gradual return of disorder. If people begin to believe that rules can be ignored without consequence, trust begins to break down. Because of this, consistency becomes essential. Laws must be applied reliably, and authority must be maintained in a way that prevents uncertainty. When individuals trust that the system will function as expected, they are more likely to cooperate and follow the rules. Another key element in this philosophy is the role of fear. While fear is often seen as negative, Hobbes views it as a necessary part of maintaining order. Fear of punishment discourages individuals from breaking laws and harming others. This controlled use of fear creates stability by preventing actions that would disrupt society. However, this does not mean that the system should rely entirely on fear. Stability is strongest when individuals recognize the benefits of the system and choose to cooperate, not only because they fear punishment, but because they understand that order improves their lives. Over time, this understanding allows society to move beyond constant tension. While the system begins as a response to fear and conflict, it creates the conditions for more complex forms of interaction. Culture, knowledge, and cooperation can develop because the basic need for security has been met. Through this detailed structure, the philosophy presents a clear solution to the problem introduced at the beginning. Human beings escape the dangers of their natural condition not by becoming fundamentally different, but by creating a system that manages their behavior and provides stability. This system, built on agreement, authority, and law, transforms a world of uncertainty into one where individuals can live, plan, and develop without constant fear. As this system takes shape, a deeper question begins to emerge about the limits of authority and the position of the individual within it. If a sovereign holds such strong power, what prevents that power from becoming destructive? And more importantly, what remains of the individual once so much authority has been transferred to a central force? To understand this, it is necessary to return to the original purpose of the agreement that created this system. Individuals did not come together to serve a ruler for its own sake. They formed a political structure to escape fear, to gain protection, and to make life more stable. The authority of the sovereign exists because it fulfills this purpose. This means that the power of the sovereign is not based on personal superiority or moral perfection. It is based on function. The sovereign exists to maintain peace and prevent the return of chaos. As long as this function is fulfilled, the authority remains justified. However, this also means that the relationship between the individual and the sovereign is not entirely one-sided. While individuals give up many of their rights, they do not give up everything. The most important thing they retain is the desire to preserve their own life. Self-preservation remains the strongest and most basic human drive. No agreement can completely remove this instinct. Even within a structured society, a person will still seek to protect themselves from harm. This creates an important limit on obedience. If the sovereign fails to provide protection, or if it directly threatens the life of an individual, the basis of the agreement begins to weaken. A person cannot be expected to passively accept their own destruction. The original purpose of the system was to avoid such danger, not to create it. This introduces a subtle but important balance. While the sovereign must have strong authority to maintain order, that authority is not completely without limits. Its legitimacy depends on its ability to provide security. When it fails in this role, the stability of the system itself is put at risk. At the same time, allowing individuals to constantly question or resist authority can also create instability. If people begin to challenge laws whenever they disagree with them, the system can quickly break down. This would lead back to the same uncertainty and conflict that the social contract was designed to prevent. Because of this, Hobbes places great emphasis on obedience to authority. Individuals must generally follow the laws and decisions of the sovereign, even when they disagree. This obedience is what maintains the structure of society and prevents a return to disorder. Yet this obedience is not based on blind loyalty. It is based on rational understanding. People obey because they recognize that the system, despite its limitations, provides greater security than the alternative. The memory of the natural condition remains a powerful reason to support order. Another important aspect of this philosophy is the role of judgment. In a stable society, individuals do not act as final judges in their own disputes. Instead, they rely on the sovereign to settle conflicts. This reduces personal bias and prevents disagreements from turning into violence. When a central authority makes decisions, those decisions become binding for everyone. This creates consistency and prevents endless arguments about what is right or wrong. While individuals may not always agree with these decisions, the existence of a final authority ensures that conflicts come to an end rather than continuing indefinitely. This system also changes how people relate to each other. In a natural condition, every interaction carries a potential risk of conflict. Trust is fragile, and cooperation is uncertain. Within a structured society, interactions become more predictable. People can rely on laws to guide behavior and resolve disputes. This predictability allows for more complex relationships to develop. Trade, communication, and collaboration become possible because individuals trust that agreements will be enforced. Over time, this leads to the growth of communities, institutions, and shared practices. Another important idea is that the sovereign represents the collective will of the people in a unified form. Instead of individuals acting separately, Their combined authority is expressed through the central power. In this sense, the sovereign is not entirely separate from the people, but a reflection of their agreement to live under a common system. This perspective changes how authority is understood. It is not simply imposed from above, but created through the collective decision to avoid conflict and establish order. The power of the sovereign comes from this original agreement, even though individuals no longer exercise that power directly. At the same time, this system requires stability over time. Frequent changes in authority or constant challenges to power can weaken the structure of society. For this reason, continuity becomes important. A stable government allows individuals to plan their lives without fear of sudden disruption. However, maintaining this stability is not always easy. External threats, internal conflicts, and changes in circumstances can all put pressure on the system. The sovereign must remain strong enough to respond to these challenges while maintaining order within society. This leads to the idea that political systems must be designed with durability in mind. Temporary solutions or weak structures may collapse under pressure. A lasting system requires clear authority, consistent laws, and the ability to adapt when necessary. Another element that becomes clear is the role of fear in maintaining order. While fear of punishment discourages harmful behavior, it also creates a boundary that individuals are less likely to cross. This controlled use of fear prevents the kind of unchecked aggression that exists in the natural condition. Yet fear alone is not enough to sustain a society. Over time, people also recognize the benefits of living within an organized system. They experience the advantages of stability, security, and cooperation. These benefits reinforce their willingness to follow the rules. As society develops, life becomes more than just survival. Individuals can pursue goals, develop skills, and build relationships without constant fear. This transformation is one of the greatest achievements of the political system. Through all of these elements, a clearer understanding of his philosophy emerges. Human beings, driven by their desires and fears, create systems of authority to protect themselves from the dangers of unrestricted freedom. These systems require strong leadership, consistent laws, and general obedience to function effectively. At the same time, the system is not entirely rigid. It exists to serve a purpose, and its success depends on its ability to maintain peace and protect individuals. When it achieves this, society becomes a place where people can live with a degree of safety and stability that would otherwise be impossible. This ongoing balance between authority and individual existence forms the core of the political structure he describes, setting the stage for the final understanding of how power, security, and human nature come together in a complete vision of society. As everything comes together, the full structure of this philosophy becomes clear in a very grounded and realistic way. It begins with a simple but powerful understanding that human beings are driven by desire, fear, and the need to survive. And from that starting point, it builds an entire explanation of why societies exist and why authority is necessary. The most important idea at the center of this philosophy is that order is not natural. Stability does not simply appear on its own. Without structure, human life tends toward conflict, uncertainty, and fear. This does not happen because people are purely evil, but because they are naturally concerned with their own survival and interest in a world where resources, power, and security are limited. Because of this, peace must be created deliberately. It requires individuals to step away from complete freedom and agree to live under a shared system. This agreement is not based on idealism or moral perfection. It is based on necessity. People accept limits on their behavior because they understand that the alternative is far worse. This leads to the formation of a powerful central authority that holds the ability to enforce rules and maintain order. The strength of this authority is not an accident. It is essential. If the authority is weak, laws become meaningless, trust disappears, and society begins to break down. The system only works when people believe that rules will be enforced consistently. At the same time, the purpose of this authority remains clear. It exists to provide security and prevent the return of chaos. Everything else depends on this foundation. Without safety, no other aspect of society can function properly. Economic activity, relationships, knowledge, and culture all require a stable environment. This creates a very direct understanding of political life. The value of a government is measured not by how ideal it appears, but by how effectively it maintains peace. A system that keeps order, even if it is strict, is seen as more valuable than one that allows freedom but fails to prevent conflict. Within this framework, freedom takes on a different meaning. It is no longer defined as the ability to do anything without restriction. Instead, it becomes the ability to live without constant fear. A person is free when they are protected, when they can act within a stable system, and when their life is not threatened by the actions of others. This shift changes how individuals relate to authority. Instead of seeing laws as limitations imposed from outside, they can be understood as conditions that make a stable life possible. Without these conditions, freedom would exist only in a fragile and dangerous form. Another important idea is that equality among individuals does not disappear within this system, but it is managed differently. In a natural condition, people are equal in their vulnerability and their ability to harm one another. In an organized society, this equality is transformed into a system where laws apply to everyone, reducing the need for personal conflict. At the same time, human nature continues to play a central role. People do not become completely cooperative or selfless simply because a system exists. They still have ambitions, fears, and desires. The difference is that these tendencies are now guided and controlled by laws and institutions. Because of this, maintaining order is not a one-time achievement. It requires constant reinforcement. Laws must be applied consistently. Authority must remain stable, and individuals must continue to recognize the value of the system. If these elements weaken, the risk of disorder begins to return. Another key aspect of this philosophy is its emphasis on realism. It does not try to imagine a perfect society or ideal human behavior. Instead, it focuses on what is likely to happen given the nature of human beings. By understanding reality as it is, rather than as it should be, it aims to create systems that actually work. This approach leads to a clear and sometimes uncomfortable conclusion. Strong authority is not necessarily a threat to society. In many cases, it is the condition that allows society to exist at all. Without it, the basic structure of cooperation and trust cannot survive. At the same time, the system is not without tension. The concentration of power in a central authority always carries the risk of misuse. Yet this risk is weighed against the far greater danger of instability and conflict. The philosophy argues that, despite its imperfections, a strong system of authority is the best solution available. This perspective has a lasting impact on how political systems are understood. It shifts the focus away from ideal visions of how society should be and toward practical questions about how stability can be maintained. It emphasizes the importance of structure, enforcement, and the management of human behavior. In the end, the message is clear and grounded in reality. Human beings create governments not because they're naturally harmonious, but because they need protection from the consequences of their own nature. Authority, law, and order are not optional features of society. They are the foundation that makes a stable and secure life possible. Through this understanding, life within a political system becomes something very different from life without one. Instead of constant fear and uncertainty, there is structure, predictability, and the possibility of growth. Individuals can build, create, and live with a sense of safety that would otherwise be impossible. And within that structure, even though freedom is limited, it becomes more meaningful. It is no longer the fragile freedom of survival, but a stable freedom that allows human life to develop, to organize, and to move beyond mere existence into something more secure and enduring.